Good afternoon. My name is Natalie Ricketts, and this is an article debrief over the article Unpacking Word Problems for Diverse Learners, A Guide to Using Schemas by Elizabeth A. Stevens and Sarah R. Powell. This article is about word problems and specifically the challenges related to word problems. This article discusses schemas and various types of schemas and steps on how to implement these in the classroom and with different students. This article also specifically covers how to introduce certain schemas to students who experience a lot of difficulty with math. It specifically states that for students with math difficulty or disability, this schema instruction is the most effective method for providing instruction on word problems. The article concludes with discussing how schema instruction helps students understand the underlying structure of a word problem instead of just superficial understanding. The first quote that stood out to me in this article is on page 86, and it states, "In a given word problem, students must be able to do the following: read the problem, identify important extraneous information, identify the unknown information to be solved, choose a strategy appropriate for the problem type, and solve the problem correctly." This article discusses how systematic and very intentional instruction is needed from teachers in the beginning when children are learning how to interpret word problems and the different schemas involved. Teachers really have to walk students through it and help them understand it at first because they are very difficult for young students to grasp. However, with time, this explicit instruction and scaffolding is no longer needed as most students can operate independently. The authors do point out in another part of the article that instruction should follow this systematic sequence where the teacher is very intentional in explaining the material to the student in the beginning, but it should be followed with guided practice and then independent practice in the end. The next quote that stood out to me in this article was on page 90, and it states, "Teachers can scaffold the use of schemas throughout the learning process. Once students demonstrate proficiency in using the schemas and solving the problems correctly, the teacher should cease providing the schema for every word problem." I believe this is a very important part to point out in this article because it does go over a lot of schemas that can be used to describe how to uh, solve word problems and how to interpret word problems for students. However, you don't want to continually be there walking the student through every single problem. The point of these schemas is to help the student learn how to independently work through a word problem. So students should be learning how to do these things on their own to identify missing information, pick out which schema to use, using diagrams and equations to solve the problem, and they should be, through the individual work, moving into more of that critical thinking stage that word problems are designed to generate. The third and final quote that I chose was on page 90, and it states, "Asking students to explain their thinking requires them to provide evidence or support for their math decision making." This is a huge part of the article, in my opinion, because this is what a lot of education seems to center around today. Um, parts of Part of the focus of the standards today is this getting students to explain their thinking instead of relying on rote memorization, because that's how students really retain information, and memorization is not proven to be very effective. So this point of asking students to explain their thinking and provide this evidence and support is really important. And the article also states that teachers can ask various questions to gauge whether students have a conceptual understanding of the word problem schemas. and this can help teachers determine if they need to give more scaffolding or more individual work with a student on a particular schema who might not understand by asking these certain questions. Thank you for listening to this article debrief on unpacking word problems for diverse learners.